She was a mother. She was missing. Her father died searching for her, and the man who knew everything, he walked above her grave, pretending to grieve, but the truth is finally coming to light. The night Crystal Rogers disappeared did not begin like a tragedy. It began like every other quiet summer evening in Bardstown, a place that looked peaceful enough to convince anyone they were safe. But some towns wear their darkness like a thin, invisible fog lingering just beneath the porch lights. And on July 3rd, 2015, that fog began to crawl toward Crystal. She was a 35-year-old mother of 5 tired but hopeful, juggling life with the kind of determination only a woman fighting for her children can understand. People who knew her said she had a glow, a softness, a spark, but they also said something else, that in the weeks before she vanished that spark had dimmed. Something was bothering her, something she didn't say out loud. The next morning, when her family realized she never came home, worry spread through the house like a cold wind. Sherry Ballard, her mother, felt it first. A mother's instinct cuts sharper than any detective's theory. She called, she texted, she waited, but the silence didn't break. By noon, the fear had turned into action. The entire Ballard family began searching every road, every parking lot, every field where Crystal might have been. And then they found it, her car, sitting abandoned on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway, a place known for passing trucks, long stretches of silent highway, and ghosts of unsolved tragedies. Inside the car were things Crystal would never willingly leave behind: her phone, her purse, her keys. Items that told one story, and one story only Crystal didn't walk away. Someone made her disappear. The moment investigators stepped onto the scene, something felt off. The car looked staged, almost placed. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints running away, no indication that Crystal ever got a chance to fight. And then came the red flag that everyone still talks about. Brooks Houck, Crystal's boyfriend, was strangely calm. Too calm. While the family searched the highway, Brooks stayed home. While volunteers combed fields and forests, Brooks gave interviews with hollow eyes and an uncomfortable stiffness. He admitted he was the last person to see her, but his timeline had gaps like bullet holes. Detectives noticed the way he phrased things, the way he minimized, the way his story shifted when questions got too close. Something inside that man was locked up tight, and behind that lock many believed was the truth. The Ballards, refusing to accept silence as an answer, launched one of the largest civilian search missions Kentucky had ever seen. Hundreds of people walked through mud, woods, barns, rivers, anything, anywhere, hoping to find Crystal. Leading all of them was her father, Tommy Ballard. Tommy searched like a man who refused to lose hope. He carried maps, flashlights, folders, and pain, so much pain it lived behind his eyes. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't trained, but he was a father, and that was enough. People said he barely slept. They saw him on back roads, at sunrise forests, at midnight fields, at dawn. He'd knock on doors, ask questions, revisit places the police dismissed. To him, Crystal wasn't just missing, she was calling. Every night he came home empty-handed but never defeated. But with every passing day, something darker began to rise around the investigation. The Houck family. Brooks' brother was a police officer, one with power, access, and influence. And suddenly evidence went missing. Phone data was misinterpreted. Leads were ignored. Whispers grew into suspicions. Suspicions grew into fear. People began asking questions. Why was a police officer interfering with another officer's interview? Why was the boyfriend's family so defensive? Why did the case feel like it was slipping through invisible hands? Bardstown was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like someone is pressing a hand over your mouth. 3 months after Crystal vanished, an investigator reviewing the case notes made a chilling remark. If someone wanted this woman gone, they didn't just hide her. They buried the truth with her. Tommy Ballard's fear deepened. He knew people in Bardstown. He knew the politics. He knew how power moved in the shadows. he knew Crystal didn't just disappear, she was taken. And whoever did it was still out there, watching, listening, waiting. Then something strange happened. A witness came forward, a person who claimed they saw a suspicious vehicle near the place where Crystal's car was found. A truck, a familiar one, but before the witness could speak publicly, they backed out, frightened, shaken. Someone had approached them. Someone made them change their mind. It was the first concrete sign that this wasn't just a case of a missing woman. This was a cover-up, a coordinated silence. One cold evening months into the search, Tommy was walking the woods behind his house. Had done it 1,000 times, but that night felt different. He paused, looked at the tree line, listened to the wind. Something inside him whispered, the closer you get, the more dangerous this becomes. But Tommy didn't stop. He couldn't. A father's love is louder than fear. Then, like a cruel echo of Crystal's disappearance, another tragedy struck. On November 19, 2016, while preparing for hunting season, Tommy Ballard was shot in the chest, right in front of his grandson. No warning, no accident. A single precise shot from the woods. It took his life instantly. And it took the town's last bit of innocence with it. Investigators later admitted what everyone already knew: Tommy wasn't killed by mistake. He was silenced. The man who refused to stop searching, the one person who kept pushing, digging, questioning, was gone. And with his death, the truth about Crystal slipped even deeper into the shadows. But the story doesn't end there, because just when the darkness felt absolute, a hidden crack appeared. Something investigators found. Something buried. Something tied to a name Bardstown feared. A clue that could unravel everything. And it would lead them straight to the farm. The Houck family farm, where secrets were kept, where stories didn't match, where the truth, after years of silence, was finally starting to tremble. And in that moment, the case began to shift. Because the dead may be silent, but justice never is. The morning investigators returned to the Houck family farm. The sky hung low and gray, like it already knew what they were about to disturb. For years, that land had been untouchable, shielded by influence, guarded by silence, avoided by anyone who didn't want trouble. But now something had changed. The evidence that surfaced after Tommy Ballard's death was small, almost insignificant on its own, but when placed beside the timeline of Crystal's disappearance, it formed a pattern. A pattern too precise to ignore, a pattern that pointed to one place, the farm. The investigators who walked onto the property felt it instantly, the tension, the weight, the sense that the truth had been buried here, waiting for the day someone brave enough would come looking. They spread out across the land-marking ground, scanning soil, sending drones over the vast fields. Every step seemed to disturb the past. Something was hiding here. They could feel it. Back in town, whispers began swirling again. People who had stayed quiet for years suddenly felt something shift. A woman came forward saying she heard arguments that night. A man admitted he saw a vehicle he recognized, but was too afraid to report. Another local confessed had always believed Crystal never left that property alive. Piece by piece, the silence started cracking. The Houck family no longer looked untouchable. They looked cornered, and when powerful people feel cornered, secrets begin to shake loose. Behind the scenes, investigators were re-examining old phone records day to long dismissed, ignored, or lost. This time, the analysis was done far away from local hands, neutral eyes, fresh minds. Suddenly, patterns emerged. Unusual movements on the night Crystal vanished. Pings that aligned with the farm. Deleted messages that suggested coordination. And then a discovery that changed everything. Someone had borrowed a piece of equipment that night. A tool often used to dig. The record of that loan had been erased, but not completely. A fragment remained in a database backup, enough to raise suspicion, enough to reopen the investigation with force. The Ballard family watched all of this from the outside, exhausted yet hopeful. Sherry Ballard stood in her living room, holding Crystal's picture between her hands like it was a lifeline. Her daughter was still missing. Her husband had been murdered, and for the first time in years the truth felt close. But hope was a dangerous thing in Bardstown. Hope got people killed. Then, without warning, the investigation took its darkest turn yet. A weapon surfaced, found during a separate search miles away, tied to a name. No one expected the name of Brooks' brother, the police officer. Detectives, analyzing the weapon, realized its significance immediately. The caliber, the condition, the proximity to timelines, everything matched too well. There was a very real possibility that this was the gun used to kill Tommy Ballard. The thought sent a chill through the department. If the weapon was truly connected to Brooks' brother, then Thomas' death wasn't just a murder. It was a message, a warning, a line drawn in the dirt around the farm: stay out or join her. As investigators tightened their grip, another twist emerged. A man named Joseph Lawson, quiet, unnoticed, living in the margins of Bardstown, was suddenly pulled in for questioning. Then his father, Stephen Lawson, followed. People who had long been rumored to know more than they said. People who may have helped move something, hide something, destroy something. Their names started appearing alongside coded conversations, mysterious meetings, a truck making runs at strange hours. The puzzle pieces weren't random anymore. They were aligning, forming the shape of a conspiracy, and at the center loomed Brooks Houck. One investigator later said it felt like watching a dam crack. At first just a line, then a drip, then a quiet rumble, until suddenly everything started pouring out. A neighbor recalled hearing construction equipment late at night. Another said they saw headlights around the farm when none should have been there. Someone else claimed Brooks made calls that sounded like instructions, cold, hurried, urgent. It was as if the entire town had been holding its breath for years and now finally exhaling. But the break through, the one that shook the case loose, came from someone no one had expected, a former friend of the Houcks. A man who knew their routines, their tempers, their secrets. He admitted he had grown afraid of them, afraid of what they were capable of, afraid he'd be next. He told investigators something they had long suspected: Crystal didn't leave the farm. She never had a chance to, and the cleanup, the cover-up, the story that followed was orchestrated, every detail carefully planned, every witness quietly discouraged, every trail expertly erased. The investigators sat with that confession in stunned silence. Because if it was true, then everything that happened afterward was not coincidence, not Crystal's disappearance, not the missing evidence, not the intimidation, not Thomas' murder. It was all connected. Just when the case seemed ready to explode, investigators were struck by one more revelation, one that tied the timeline together with chilling clarity. A recording, an old surveillance snippet long thought irrelevant. In the background of unrelated footage, a car drove by, a car that shouldn't have been there, a car linked to the Houck family, and in that grainy clip, in the reflection of the window, was something small, something metallic, something the forensic team recognized instantly, a tool used for digging, for burying, for hiding something that wasn't meant to be found. The room fell silent as investigators connected the final dots. The night Crystal disappeared, the farm wasn't sleeping. It was working. By early 2023, the truth, after 8 long years, could no longer be contained. The evidence, the confessions, the timeline, the weapon, the witnesses, the cover-up, everything pointed toward one outcome. One man, Brooks Houck, the boyfriend who stayed calm, the man who didn't search, the man who didn't flinch when Crystal vanished, the man whose family fought harder to silence questions than to find answers. He had always been the center of the storm, and now finally the storm had enough force to hit back. Indictments began falling like dominoes. Names that once felt untouchable became headlines. The conspiracy was laid bare. And the man who once walked Bardstown with confidence now walked into a courtroom in shackles. But the story wasn't finished. Because one question remained the question that haunted Crystal's family, the question Tommy lost his life trying to answer: where is Crystal? What happened to her body? Who moved it? Who helped? And could the truth, after all these years, finally lead investigators to her? Chapter 2 ends not with closure, but with the heaviest truth, yet the people responsible for her disappearance are finally cracking. Someone will slip. Someone will talk. Someone will reveal the one secret the Houcks fought hardest to bury. And when that moment comes, everything will collapse. The courtroom felt colder than any winter Bardstown had ever seen, not because of the temperature, but because after 8 years of darkness, the truth was finally stepping into the light, and the people who spent years burying that truth were now the ones being buried by it. Brooks Houck sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, jaw locked. For so long he had been untouchable, protected by power, influence, and fear. He walked freely while a mother grieved, while a father hunted for answers, while a family drowned in questions. But now his world was shrinking, the walls were closing. Every secret he thought he had buried had begun clawing its way back to the surface. The indictments, the witnesses, the timeline, the weapon. The conspiracy. Piece by piece, the illusion of innocence evaporated. For the first time, Brooks looked small. Outside the courthouse, a storm gathered not in the sky, but in the hearts of everyone who had lived this nightmare. Sherry Ballard walked through the doors with a picture of Crystal held against her chest as she had done for nearly a decade. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for truth, for closure, for the promise she made to her daughter and to her husband: I won't stop until justice is done. Her steps were heavy, but determined, carrying the weight of 2 graves and 1 missing body. Inside the courtroom, reporters whispered. Supporters gathered, and the people who once stood silent now stood together. Bardstown was no longer afraid. Investigators presented the evidence like a puzzle, finally completed: the surveillance reflection, the equipment, the deleted records, the phone pings on the farm, the witness statements, the tool markings, the weapons suspected in Tama's murder. Each detail struck like a hammer against the foundation the Houcks had built. Every revelation cut deeper. Every fact peeled back another layer of lies. And with each strike, the conspiracy that once felt impenetrable began to crumble. The Lawson indictments played a key role. Phone logs, movements, timestamps all pointed toward one devastating truth: multiple people had helped cover up Crystal's disappearance. They had helped clean, they had helped move, they had helped hide, but in the process they left shadows, traces, patterns no one could ignore. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the puzzle assembled itself into a single horrifying picture. Crystal didn't walk away. She didn't disappear. She was erased. And Tommy, the man who never stopped searching for her, was eliminated because he got too close. As the trial unfolded, a shift occurred, a power reversal no one expected. People who once shielded Brooks began distancing themselves. Those who defended him suddenly fell silent. The loyalty that once bound the conspiracy together began to unravel. Fear had kept them quiet for years. But now fear was on the other side. A crack appeared in the story, then another, until finally someone broke. A cooperating witness, not a confession of murder, not a detailed map, but enough to confirm Crystal's final location wasn't random. Enough to confirm the Houck farm was the center of the operation. Enough to confirm that Tama's death was not an accident, but a calculated warning shot. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to shatter the myth of Brooks' innocence forever. Back on the Ballard property, Sherry stood alone at the edge of the woods where Tommy took his last breath. The leaves rustled with the same quiet whisper that haunted her for years. But this time it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a message. She closed her eyes, imagining Tama's voice, steady, determined, unbreakable. Keep going, Sherry. Don't stop now. And she didn't. She couldn't. because justice was finally here knocking like a fist at the door of every man who had tried to bury her daughter. As the final days of the proceedings unfolded, the weight of the truth settled across Bardstown. The farm was no longer a place of secrets. The timeline was no longer a mystery. The community was no longer divided. The lies had rotted from within, and the people who wove them were finally unraveling. Brooks sat motionless as the judge read the charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. He looked around the courtroom, perhaps searching for one familiar face, one last shred of the power he once held, but there was no one left. Power is loud when you have it, but when it leaves quietly like a light switching off in an empty room. The official verdict marked the beginning of the end. The investigation into Crystal's exact resting place continued stronger than ever, driven by new testimony, new clues, new leads. But emotionally, spiritually, the Ballard family knew something profound had happened. The monster that haunted them was no longer invisible, no longer untouchable, no longer protected. Justice had taken its first breath, and though Crystal hadn't been found, the world finally knew who stole her life and who silenced the man who fought to find her. On the final day of court, Sherry walked outside into the fading sunlight. The sky looked eerily similar to the night Crystal vanished, soft, quiet, deceptively peaceful. But this time something felt different. She lifted Crystal's photograph, holding it gently against her heart. There was grief in her eyes, but also strength and hope, a hope she hadn't felt in years. Because even though her daughter's body was still missing, Crystal wasn't lost anymore. The world finally knew her story. The truth finally had a voice, and the people responsible were finally facing consequences they could no longer escape. Justice had taken 8 long years, cost her a daughter, a husband, and parts of her soul she would never get back. But justice had arrived, not perfectly, not fully, but undeniably. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sherry stood tall, whispering a promise she knew both Crystal and Tommy could hear. "I'm not finished. I'll bring you home." And in the silence that followed, it felt as if the wind itself answered, gentle, steady, resolute. The case wasn't just an unsolved mystery anymore. It was a reckoning, a story of disappearance, conspiracy, murder, and a mother who refused to let darkness win. A story that ended not with fear, but with courage, with truth, with justice finally stepping out of the shadows. Because in Bardstown, the dead may be buried, but the truth never stays underground forever.